When does mockery become hate speech? The issue is alive today after that High Court judge ruled that Humberside Police had gone too far in deeming tweets mocking the whole idea of trans people changing their gender. Now, the police had not said the tweets were a crime, but they did visit the man responsible for them and log his words as a non-crime hate incident. Now, many think the police are hopeless at judging these issues, going way too far sometimes in a wokely direction. In this case, it was all the more interesting that the man doing the tweeting was in fact himself a former policeman. And we can talk to him now. Harry Miller, who founded the campaign group FairCop. Thank you for joining us on PM, Mr. Miller. Can I just first ask, do you accept there are limits on free speech and that can at some point turn into hate speech and could be reasonably stopped by the law?
We've never, ever suggested that there shouldn't be limits to free speech.
Right.
When it comes to harassing people, when it comes to malicious communications, when it comes to targeting people, we're not for that at all.
Right.
What we are for is for free and frank and satirical discussion around a range of subjects, including the whole issue of gender identity. And I do take issue with your introduction that I was an anti-trans tweeter. I'm not anti anything. I am pro women and I'm pro-democracy and I'm pro-discussion and I'm pro-free speech.
Okay, I think anyone reading your tweets would say you're anti-trans. Let's just be called a spade a spade.
Well, no, they wouldn't. I mean, what exactly
I might have
is
misunderstood.
There? What exactly is there in there that's anti-trans?
Well, you're mocking the idea at people changing gender.
I'm mocking the idea that it's possible for an immutable characteristic like sex to change just because somebody says so.
Right.
That's an idea that's worth mocking.
Well, certainly the trans community feel you have mocked them, and I think, you know, I've just read the tweets. I'm looking at some of them now, and I think the listener would benefit from knowing that it's reasonable to call them anti-trans. But look, you accept the limits. You accept you're not against the idea that there can be something called hate speech. Do you think you would have launched this kind of, if you like, sequence of tweets on an issue you might feel more sensitive about, race, for example?
No, of course I wouldn't, because that's not an issue. Race is a thing. The notion of race is not up for discussion. The government hasn't called upon its citizens to discuss the notions of race. It did call upon its citizens to discuss the notion of gender in relation to reforms to the Gender Recognition Act reform. So that's what I engage with. So it's not a fair question.
OK. Can I don't want to put you in the psychiatrist's chair here, Mr. Miller.
No, go ahead. I'm quite happy.
No,
I'm relaxed.
What is it? You come across as a bit obsessed about something which you could quite happily ignore. You could have your view. You're not really debating here. It's sometimes a little bit sweary, isn't it? It's quite insulting. Some of it you could say is satirical. You know, I'm a fish and I regard my right. Don't misspecies me. You could call that satirical. Other bits are just very insulting.
No, they're not. They're not insulting. There's nothing in there that's insulting at all. Tell me where I've insulted.
OK, well, Adrian Harrop.
No, he's not.
You called him a gloating bastard. Harrop doing what he does best. Is that not? That is Trans Day of Remembrance a thing then? Like an actual one?
Well,
I'm just reading you the tweets. I mean, they're insulting, aren't they? There's no point in saying they're not insulting.
No, I had no idea. I had never heard of Trans Day of Remembrance. I saw it on a TUC tweet and I said, is it a thing? I'd absolutely no idea.
What's the Witchfinder General gloating about now? That's insulting to the people who are...
Yes, that was aimed at Dr.
Sean Fay, clothing fascist, utter... I'm not even going to say the word. Punctuation.
Okay, absolutely.
You can't pretend you're not being insulting or that you're not being anti-trans. Of course you are.
No, I was
you might as well be honest about it.
No, I was being anti-Dr. Adrian Harrop because he was celebrating the no platforming of the feminist Meghan Murphy, and Sean Fay. I can't remember why I tweeted that. I think he was having a go at somebody's dress sense. So I wasn't having a go at him because he was trans. I was having a go at him because he'd made some ridiculous comment online.
I don't know. Do you feel this is like engaging with the government's debate about the subtleties of the Gender Recognition Act, or is this just a kind of weird tirade of someone who's got no particular connection? I don't know if the trans community's ever hurt you in particular, It just seems weird that you would want to go out there and bait and insult other people, even though you may have the right to do so.
Right. The High Court has said that I didn't bait or insult anybody. The High Court said that I wasn't even in the foothills of baiting anybody. What I did in the public market square of Twitter was engage in a lively debate. That's what I did. I don't apologise for it, and I would encourage people to join in and do it. And I was speaking up on behalf of women.
I don't know. Most of the time you don't seem to be speaking up on behalf of women. You seem to be actually putting trans people down. And that's a very different thing, isn't it?
No, because that was 30 tweets over a period of 2 months. I tweeted hundreds of things during that period. They were the tweets that somebody separated out. So you're taking individual tweets way out of context.
Taking the tweets that have been the subject of the case today. But anyway, you stand by the fact, and I think this is the important point of agreement, that there can be such a thing as hate speech, and it is about drawing a line, and the argument is about where you draw the line.
Yeah, but the real story here is that Humberside police were compared to the Gestapo and the Stasi. I think that's the real story.
Harry Miller, thank you very much for joining us. Well, let's get a perspective from the point of view of someone in the police. It's not easy to set out exactly where that line is going to be drawn between disagreeable free speech and hate speech. Detective Constable Tiffany Lane is the Action Against Hate Coordinator for Cambridgeshire Police. I spoke to her just before we came on air.
We can't just simply have a line where it's right and it's wrong, because every single scenario is different and every single type of hatred is different. So if you're doing it in the street, it would be different to if you're doing it online.
Do the police accept that mocking, satire, being offensive, absolutely legitimate, and that can't always be deemed a hate crime?
Yeah, I think we do accept that. But if we, as in the police, are investigating something as a hate crime, we're not looking at hate as in what you might perceive to be violence, really nasty, sinister stuff. We're looking at subtleties as well, because subtleties can also be defined as hate crimes. So if you look at the definition of hate crime, there's no hate in the definition, it's hostility. So we're looking for the subtleties if that's what we need to look for.
Now, I think then some people would say, but that's going too far. And that's where the police get into being too woke and too out there, and then start arguing not just about hate crimes, but non-crime hate incidents. And do you accept that sometimes the police get the line completely wrong?
I think there's always human error in everyone's life. What I would say is I don't think the police get enough time and enough resources to do a good enough job in a lot of cases. So do we go too far? I don't think we do. I don't think we can. I don't think we're able to. But we do have the need to get things right for victims of crime or people who purport to be victims of crime. And if that means trying to intervene and trying to make peace between two parties to stop things escalating, then that can only be a good thing.
Now, one of the principles often talked about here is the idea that victims of hate must themselves be the ones who judge whether it is hate or not. And many people worry that that is giving, if you like, too much weight to the alleged victim to say, I'm offended and I want the police to kind of rate this as a hate incident. And that tilts the balance too far away from free speech. And I wonder whether it should be up to the victims to be able to self-declare their offence and thus make something a hateful incident.
I think what people forget is that any person can perceive something to be hate. All we need to have is someone's perception to record something as hate. In order to prosecute, which is very, very different, we need evidence. And that's the police's role to collect that evidence. So I think we tend to forget that we don't need much to record something as something, but we need a lot to prosecute it as such. Does that make sense?
No, that makes complete sense, Tiffany, and that's a very important distinction. So you're saying a victim just saying, I found that offensive, it's a hate crime, might get it logged, hateful, but that would not necessarily result in a prosecution. Yeah,
exactly, yes.
Do the police welcome their invitation to kind of be judging these sorts of things? Because you're not going to satisfy everybody in the wherever you draw the line, I would think.
Absolutely not. No, we're never going to satisfy everybody. But the thing that's pained me about today is it might stop people coming forward. And hate is the most underreported crime. And it's the crime that we want people to tell us about, because we need to know what's happening in our communities. So if it's going to put people off reporting that they are feeling hatred within their community, then it's going to be really damaging. And that's what I've found today. It's made me feel a little bit uneasy, because the work that we do is trying to engage in communities and trying to get people to tell us about what's happening. It's difficult, and this could set us back a long way.
Yeah, well, a lot of people would say, look, come on, someone tweeting offensive stuff into the ether, very different to violent crime, and there's all too much violent crime that the police are not detecting or not dealing with. I
agree, but you know that hate stems from insensitivity, from hostility, and it does escalate into violent crime. So if we can stop the subtleties in criminality, maybe we can stop the really large stuff.
Detective Constable Tiffany Lane, Action Against Hate Coordinator for Cambridgeshire Police.
This is James Menendez with NewsHour live from the BBC. Now, to end the programme, we're going to hear about an important court case here in the UK. It concerns a man, Harry Miller, who took his local police force to court after they recorded a series of tweets he'd written about transgender people as a hate incident, despite admitting that he hadn't committed any crime. In the jargon, it's what's called a non-crime hate incident, and under the guidelines, the police are required to keep a record. But a judge at the High Court ruled today the police had unlawfully infringed Mr. Miller's freedom of expression by turning up at his work to challenge him on his tweets. The effect of that, the judge said, and I'm quoting here, must not be underestimated. To do so would be to undervalue a cardinal democratic freedom. In this country, he goes on, we have never had a Checker, a Gestapo or a Stasi. Sarah Phillimore is Harry Miller's barrister. She's also a member of a group called FairCop that campaigns against what they say is police overreach in these sorts of cases. First, what's her reaction to today's ruling?
I'm very, very pleased, and I hope that it is going to go to the Supreme Court. I think this is exactly what this topic needs. Proper analysis and debate, which frankly we should have had years ago. It's a very important issue, and I'm really pleased that the judge was open to that, and I hope the Supreme Court take it up.
And yet, the judge said that the guidance that police use for following up these sorts of incidents and recording these non-criminal hate incidents, as they call them, that guidance is lawful and doesn't breach anybody's freedom of speech, human rights.
Yes, he was quite clear that the guidance exists for a legitimate purpose. It's quite right that police forces should be informed of people whose behaviour could potentially escalate into something much more criminal. But the difficulty in this case is this. The judge has said the guidance is lawful, but the application of the guidance was very clearly unlawful. And the terms the judge used were Gestapo, the Stasi. And I'm really disappointed to see now that the police have just given a statement on the ruling saying they're very pleased, their guidance has been upheld. There doesn't appear to have been any comment made by Humberside that the actions of one of their officers was akin to the actions of the secret police in eastern Germany. And I think that's hugely significant.
And why was it, do you think? I mean, being visited by the police and being told that what you're doing, that there's been a complaint about it and that someone finds it offensive and that you should stop. Well, I mean, what's wrong with that?
Because we're in a very peculiar position in that wanting to debate about the issues of sex and gender is being touted by many as akin to vile, virulent bigotry and hatred. It clearly is not. And the judgment for Mr. Justice Knowles sets that out very clearly. We're in a really peculiar situation now where wanting to debate matters of huge significance, i.e. the potential erasure of the female sex, is being held up as akin to racism. And women like me are being told that we must shut up or we will be investigated by the police, we will lose our jobs, we will be no platformed at speaking events, etc.
But is it about trying to shut down a legitimate debate, or is it trying to shut down people making comments, as some people might say Harry Miller did, making comments that are designed to disparage trans people?
Well, the reason why disparaging or upsetting people is not part of the criminal law is because you have to ask who is then defining and deciding that. We have very wide ambits of what is acceptable speech for that reason. Now, I have been told in terms that for saying I do not believe that biological sex can change, I'm a transphobic bigot and my employer will be informed of my hate. Now, that is not acceptable. That's why I'm here, that's why I'm angry, and that's why I've been supporting FairCop. This is not the purview of the criminal law. being offensive is not a crime.
Do you think, though, that there will be some people who take this ruling as to mean they can say whatever they want?
Absolutely. And those people need to be dealt with. There will always be, on any side of the debate, a core of people who are just simply unpleasant and frankly dangerous.
And isn't that why the guidance is there?
Yes, the guidance is there for perfectly noble reasons. But the distinction we have to make, this is a distinction made by Timothy Garton Ash, which I think is a really important one. It's the distinction between hate speech and dangerous speech. Now, dangerous speech targets individuals, holds them up for possible physical attack and so forth. That very much is within the purview of the criminal law. That protects our society. But hate speech is in the ears of the beholder. We have to have a mature and adult conversation about this, about the limits to the exercise of our freedom of speech. And it should only be limited in clearly defined and serious circumstances. And Harry Miller is vindicated. He's not a bigot. He's not full of hate. His rights to speak were unlawfully breached, and the court has recognised that.
That was Sarah Phillimore, Harry Miller's barrister. Let's talk to our legal affairs correspondent, Clive Coleman. How significant is this ruling, Clive?
Well, I think it is significant. If I tell you that there are in excess of 25,000 of these non-crime hate incidents logged by UK police each year. Of course, the majority are not in relation to trans hate. There are obviously, the trans community is a relatively small one, but in relation, for instance, to race hate, disability hate. And the police now, I think, are going to have to think very, very carefully and study the words of Mr. Justice Julian Knowles when they receive a complaint as to whether they do go out, they do investigate, and whether they do now log one of these non-crime hate incidents. So for policing, I think there are considerable consequences, and I think there are also consequences for, minority groups who I think will fear that some people will take the words of Mr. Justice Julian Knowles. Obviously, many people will take them as a robust and muscular defence of the principle of free speech. But some, I think, will fear that some people will see this as a green light to enable them to make hurtful and offensive comments and direct those comments at minority groups. So I think it is a very significant ruling for policing and indeed for groups who feel vulnerable and fear the kind of comments that Harry Miller made. I mean, they obviously Mr. Justice Julian Knowles made it clear that they are covered by free speech, but they were he used pretty crude language, talked about, removing body parts. He would say using Anglo-Saxon language, but those comments have upset some people, clearly.
Yes, and just in the 30 seconds we've got left, Sarah Phillimore mentioned the Supreme Court. I mean, are the police likely to have to revise their guidelines, even though the judge today said that they were lawful?
No, I don't think he was absolutely clear about that. By the way, forgive me, I didn't hear the earlier part of your interview, but the guidelines themselves came out of the Stephen Lawrence case, and the idea behind them, everyone agrees, is utterly laudable, and that is that you damp down on hate incidents before they escalate into full-scale hate crimes. And so I don't think anyone feels that there's anything other than a good purpose behind the guidance.
OK, Clive, we'll have to leave it there. We're out of time, I'm afraid, but thanks very much. Clive Coleman, our legal affairs correspondent.